to the Good Morning Show with Oliver O.T. Thomas.
We're back. Welcome back. 8:03 a.m. in the morning, man. We want to thank Warren Bell, WB, and Romalis Brown. Early Bird said stop calling him Romalis now. Warren, yeah, it said give him his whole Ninth Ward name. So what is a Roman? How does a Roman wind up in the lower nine? My name is Romulus Brown. No, what? Your name is Robert, bruh. So I don't know where the Romulus come from. You know, like you're like some Greek. You trying to adopt. You're from the lower Ninth Ward.
Mispronouncing it. It's Romalis.
It's
you see,
Romalis.
You know how to pronounce it, okay?
Well, you were more hooked on phonics than I was, okay? But we went to the same schools, bruh. This is OT and the Early Bird, man. Welcome back to the Good Morning Show, 8:03 a.m. in the morning. But look, we're having our fun, but nobody appreciates more what Warren Bell and Ro Brown do with news and sports. Two of the icons of this community, man, who deliver factual news and sports every day. No alternative facts right here at WBOK, real talk for real time. But talking about real talk for real time, I want to welcome this young lady to the Good Morning Show.
Good morning.
Miss Nahliah. Miss Nahliah Weber. She's the executive director of Open, the Orleans Public Education Work. And this whole conversation, and I was talking to her off air, this whole conversation about accountability and equity, I think she's one of the people who kicked it off. So when we have these prominent discussions and panel discussions here and around the state, the very first effort where I thought that someone was trying to get to the bottom of what is accountability in education, what is equity in education, I really appreciate the fact that you started the conversation about a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And thanks for having me on. I'm very happy to talk about Open, what we're up to in our work.
For our listening audience, tell us, well, first of all, who is Nahliah? Who is Nahliah Weber? Why this commitment to education? And what is Open's charge?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Nahliah Weber. I'm the current executive director of the Orleans Public Education Network. Who am I? I moved down here a couple of years ago following a very dear friend who is a New Orleans native. I came down here a couple of times to visit her, and I ended up loving it. One of the things that I also love about New Orleans in particular and Louisiana is that they're front and center of the education conversation. My background is in education.
We haven't figured out which front or what part of the center, or whether we're getting squeezed in the middle, but we're definitely in the midst of.
You're definitely on. People are watching. You're on people's radar. And my background is in education, particularly how education functions to either support young people in need or not. And so Louisiana, in my studies and just in our work, it kept coming up. And so New Orleans is a great place to do this work. So Open, New Orleans Public Education Network, I came on board in August of 2016, and we are a policy and advocacy organization that advocates for equity and excellence in public education. We're about making sure that there is an informed and equipped citizenry who knows what the policies are and how they can move on those policies so that they can advocate effectively for public education and other things that impact young people in schools. And so we see policy as a tool. In order for it to be a tool, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be relevant, and it needs to be digestible. And so in moving towards that goal, we decided to publish the bills to watch this year so that we can get policy in the digestible format to the people so that they can know what's going on in the legislature.
And 504-260-9265. I have a very active audience when you talk about education. I'm so proud of them. Usually when we have education topics, folk are really cued in, and they weigh in a lot. So give us a call, 504-260-9265, so we can talk to Ms. Weber about what's happening in the legislature right now. If you could go through a list of those bills, what they potentially mean, and how should our citizens react to them, that would be real helpful.
Absolutely. So before we begin, I will say this. Open, myself and the rest of my team, we are not on top of every single bill that has to do with young people or that came out of the Education Committee. We are part of some coalitions that are looking at some bills a bit more intensely than others, but we are not,
You're not tracking all of those.
Not tracking all of the bills, all the bills. And we selected a few from all that the Education Committee was considering to put on our bills to watch. So there are some that we know a little bit more than others, but we encourage everyone to go to our website where you can get regular, up-to-date, notes about what's happening with the bills that we are considering. So there's a couple of things that are happening, and I'm going to talk about some of the ones that we highlighted in green that we say are a go, and some of the ones that we highlighted in red that we think that people should really be paying attention to and be concerned about. So there are some good things that are happening. We have House Bill 387, which expands on the Parents' Bill of Rights and makes sure that, it proposes to make sure that parents have timely information on what's happening with their young people, that they get that information from schools in a timely fashion for their children who have not reached the age of majority. So we do not want for there to be any barriers between parents and the information that they need to effectively advocate for their children, and we think that the language in HB 387 will support that. On the early childhood side, we have some exciting things happening. I've been in contact with Melanie Bronfman at the Louisiana Policy Institute for House Bill 513, which says that unclaimed property from the Leverage Fund to be dedicated to Louisiana Early Childhood Education Fund. As we all know, Louisiana does not currently 100% fully fund early childhood supports throughout the state. That is where a lot of the inequities that we see in K through 12 begin. They begin before kindergarten, and so we really need to see a state commitment to funding the educational needs of our earliest learners, and this is a way to do that. I also want to give a plug to the grade level reading campaign that is also pushing, that will be pushing for OPSB to consider a similar measure of making sure that, tax credits, ITEP, will be allocated to.
I want to talk to you about the early childhood thing. That conversation's been bubbling up the last several years. It's been around for a long time, though. But the investments from legislative bodies and educational bodies have not matched the conversation. Are we finally going to see, and especially in Louisiana, Ms. Weber, because we lag when you talk about whether it's early childhood education or just standard public education, K through 12, we lag behind most of the rest of the states in the nation, and even in the South. Are we finally going to see that early childhood effort resourced?
Well, we're seeing some traction, right? So, again, another plug to the grade level reading campaign. They've been advocating on the local level. The upcoming mayor, Cantrell, has dedicated some funds for early childhood specifically, which is a big win. I believe it's around $750,000. So that's a win. I mean, again, we can always use more. But $750,000 is better than the zero that was being allocated before. I got an update about House Bill 513 that I just mentioned, and it's moving along. And this is about, again, finding the money to support our early learners. So there is some traction. We have a long way to go when we're talking about the state's needs, but we are seeing some. We have the Ready LA Coalition, which is statewide. Again, the Louisiana Policy Institute. We have NOLA. We have a lot of organizations that are working to make sure that the state is adequately funding early child education, and we're seeing some traction. So I think it's on the up. Okay. Definitely.
Is there something we can do? We have public education is governed by the Board of Elementary Secondary Education here. We have our funding formula, the MSP, all those things that come down from the legislature. But in this conversation and tracking what happens with public education, are you guys looking at opportunities or making recommendations to local bodies that no matter if the state bodies are going in one direction, we can begin to stabilize and improve our local education efforts and start tracking in the right direction? Because right now it seems like the good of a few outweighs the good of the whole. Or there's certain small sectional anchors that drag down the entire system.
Okay. Well, education is still very much so in Louisiana. It is still very much a local issue. There are things that come from the state that definitely come from Bessie. But when you look at it parish by parish, city by city in Louisiana, a lot of the decisions are really made on the local level. And so, yes, if you're going to make any pushes, not just in early childhood education, but also K through 12, your local bodies are really the places where you can push. And there are a lot of advocacy organizations in early childhood as well as the K through 12 and higher ed that are making a lot of local pushes. I mean, there's just certain things that you're not going to get accomplished on the state level, but it's really about making a local effort, and that's where a lot of the we're going to see a lot of the movement.
So, what are some of the bills at the state level that we should track where we should have some concern?
Yes. So if you look at the list of bills that we put out, we have a few on tops. We call it topsy-turvy because it's just all over the place, right?
Seems to make sense.
With this fiscal crisis that the state is in, people are looking for ways to figure out how to close this $1 billion gap.
And in Louisiana, we know one thing: if there's a budget problem, the first thing we do is cut education.
Right. And so
standard operating procedure.
There are bills out there that are trying to save TOPS. There are bills that are trying to put more restrictions on it. We have some issues with the TOPS program overall. It's a program that costs about $300 million annually. Even last year, the state was only able to fund 70% of that, or just a little over $210 million. The issue that we have here is, TOPS, in many ways, it can continue some of the inequities that it inherits from the K through 12 system. When we're using ACT scores as the way to determine who gets the award and who does not get the award, especially when we know that there's a strong correlation between family income and test scores. We've also seen in the last 10 years a 10% increase of families making at least $150,000 a year getting the TOPS award. And so we just, $300 million, $210 million for a program that we're not particularly sure is actually increasing equity among students across the state, we have a problem with. And I think that we can come up with some better uses for TOPS. For example, where's the support for first-generation college goers? What about remedial course support so that folks who do have to take remedial courses, they can either get the credit for it or they don't have to pay for it? Where are the support systems for freshmen and sophomores so that they don't leave college and that they actually do complete their education in the first 4 years? So $300 million, we can think of some other things that can happen with it rather than perpetuating some of the the race and income inequities that currently exist. So I think that people should, we primarily focus on K through 12 education, but what's the point of going through your K through 12 experience and if you can't go to college, if that's what you want to do, and if the resources aren't there. And so we think that people should be taking a look at TOPS, especially anyone who has children in high school and they're relying on these funds to be able to attend college. So that's our opinion on TOPS. There's a lot of other things that are just kind of troubling overall. There's been some movement that we think violates separation between church and state in schools. We have something that actually just passed, which is teachers praying during the school day with students. Before, it was the case that teachers were more than welcome to pray before or after school hours. Now there it's Senate Bill 253 sponsored by Milkovich. Now teachers praying during the school day. That's a bit concerning. We think it's a slippery slope when we are expressing our private beliefs in public settings. There's also Senate Bill 224 supported by Barrow that looks to place "In God We Trust," that motto, in public schools. We don't really know what that's about. Again, we want schools to be welcoming and affirming places for students of all faiths and all backgrounds. And so we think that some of these things might be troubling and discriminatory against students who may not practice this particular religion or any religion at all. So those are something to look at. Senate Bill 303, we've been pushing in our own social media and with the Youth and Discipline group that is headed by Equity in All Places. It's it's called an anti-bullying bill. It just recently passed out of committee and it's being considered by the Senate, but it has some language in it that is highly problematic.
Such as?
So, a school employee who witnesses, according to the bill, a school employee who witnesses an incident of bullying may decide to use, whatever kind of force against a student.
Whatever. That would be troubling. Whatever kind of force.
Right.
Well, let me shoot him down right now.
Right. So using force against students, calling the police on students when they believe that they're seeing an incident of bullying. Now, here's the thing about bullying. It has a very specific definition. It's not just teasing. It's something that is persistent and ongoing. So it's not just an incident, right? You can't look at one isolated incident and say that that's bullying and then use that incident to justify.
Well, I thought he was bullying her.
Right. And we cannot use, this one snapshot incident to justify putting our hands on students, calling the police on students, and having our young people interacting with the criminal justice system. So, again, it passed out of committee. It was being considered, and so we're very troubled by this. And it also includes, removing kids from schools. It's just problematic.
Well, this seems to be a step backwards because we've been having these discussions the last several years about the school to prison pipeline, about suspensions and expulsions. But it seems to me like this is a step back towards the direction we're trying to get away from.
Yeah. Right.
But is this all part of this whole conservative Tea Party evangelical wave that we see happening in a lot of state legislatures now, especially in the South?
I think that a lot of this, I will look at Senate Bill 303.
Or just reactionary politics.
Yeah, right, in conjunction with some of the other things that are happening in the legislature, which are reactionary politics. When we consider the recent school shootings, unfortunately, school shootings have been going on for quite a long time. Right. But when we look at school shootings and when we're hearing about, teen suicide rates, when we're hearing about youth violence, I think a lot of what we're seeing in the legislature is in reaction to that. And I would look at, like I said, the so-called anti-bullying bill in conjunction with, for example, Senate Bill 298, the Safe Schools Act. Which allows a school employee to determine, if they determine that a student poses a significant threat, which is very subjective, they can have that
shoot them down on the spot. I'm being facetious.
Right, but they can have that child removed from the school grounds. They can, if they believe that they're in danger of imminent physical harm, they can contact law enforcement right away, and they can also request that security be in their classroom while they're teaching. And so, coming fresh off of Parkland, we can say that this is in reaction to those kinds of things, but what we're concerned about is what happens in between these school shootings and who does this impact. We already know that our discipline policies disproportionately impact children of color, particularly black boys, and on the rise, black girls. And so we just have issues here. I think that there might be some overzealous teachers or other school administrators who may look at something like this as kind of like a carte blanche to deal with students that they find problematic and deal with them in problematic ways.
We're going to go to our lines right now. 504-260-9265. Ms. Weber, the Executive Director of Open, bills that are kind of going through our legislature right now. We're trying to break down those bills, those green and red bills. Gotcha. Line 1, Miss Alicia, you're on with Miss Weber.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Early bird, and also your guest.
I can't.
I have a question, and it kind of falls on just what you were just speaking about. And I want to know if your organization knew about this, was okay with this. Are you going to be willing to try to make change on this? I'm going to give you an example. 7-year-old boy shows up at school with a roll of colorful Tums, the antacid Tums.
Mm-hmm. Heard about this.
Okay. He was arrested, fingerprinted, booked in jail, and amongst the charges, he was charged with drug possession and distribution. 7 years old.
And where was this?
Well, it was in Orleans Parish. And how many times we as children thought X-Lax was candy?
Right.
Can you imagine us going to jail because we shared a piece of what we thought was candy? If you know about this, did you know about it before it was legislated? Where do you all stand on it?
Thank you, Miss Alicia. Appreciate that. There we go. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So I heard about that incident last night. I attended a community meeting sponsored by Step Up Louisiana, and there was an activist there who told the crowd about this. So I mean, do we agree with something like this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I was aghast. That was the first time that I had ever heard about it. And so what we do is open is to work with these organizations that are advocating on behalf of these young folks. There are organizations that directly touch families and directly touch young people and advocate for them on an individual level. And what we do is we try to work with them through coalitions and cooperative arrangements to support the policies that would end something like this. So, for example, we have the Friends and Family of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children. They have been spearheading.
Gina Womack and her organization.
Yep, fabulous group. They've been spearheading Senate Bill 465, which calls for really safe and supportive schools for children. And they're joined with the Power Coalition and a lot of other groups. So, no one is. I mean, we have people that work. There are organizations that work directly with families to address in real time the issues that they're facing. And then there are organizations like ourselves that work with other organizations on the policy level to get the information out there, to get people informed about what's happening, to get them to advocate for something differently. But no, we definitely don't agree. We definitely do not support this. We will not support any bill that will allow for the criminalization of kids and allowing a 7-year-old to be pretty much like victimized by this system for making a very honest mistake.
Absolutely. We're going to take our break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion. All things education, the Louisiana legislature, education bills to watch, with Miss Nahliah Weber, Executive Director of Open, Orleans Public Education Network. We'll be back after the break. I don't know why I'm so tongue-tied this morning, but we're going to fix it during the break. We'll be back.
WBOK 1230 AM, New Orleans.
You're listening to the Good Morning Show with Oliver O.T. Thomas.
We're back. 8:32 a.m. in the morning. Happy Friday to everybody who's starting their French Quarter Festival weekend. We're ultimately rolling into the spring, rolling into Jazz Fest. And Lord, let there be some good weather. Early bird, yeah, absolutely. But having a wonderful time talking to Miss Nahliah Weber, Executive Director of Open Orleans Public Education Network. And it's education bills to watch in the 2018 legislature. Of course, you know, we're in Louisiana. Louisiana.
Stop.
We live in Louisiana. We know that every bill you need to watch. You never know what may come out of the legislature. Particularly, we see all of these bills about bulletproof backpacks, teachers, armed teachers, armed janitors. So, you know, the solution to mass murder is more weapons of mass destruction. How much more goofy can it get?
No, Not goofy, but scary.
Scary. I'm trying to be facetious, but you're really right. It's really a lot more serious
Scary.
than that.
I mean, we saw recently the U.S. News and World Report saying that, Louisiana is 50 out of 50. We recently saw the fourth grade NAEP scores, which weren't that great. And I don't want to use, terms like behind to talk about an entire state. I think it downplays and dismisses a lot of the great work that people are doing on the ground to make Louisiana a great state. But using that language, you can't be reactive if you're already behind, right? You have to be proactive. You have to have a vision, and we need, legislation that provides that vision. And, in some regards, we're just not seeing that. Senate Bill 301 is highly reactive. It's regressive. It says that, teachers have the right to use physical force.
And aggressive.
Right. In order to protect themselves or another person on school grounds from imminent physical injury. Again, if you keep in mind, the school shooting, and it's an epidemic in this country, that could make sense when you look at something like that along those lines. But again, we're concerned about what happens in between these incidents, what happens every day, what's the day-to-day experience of a young person in school. And we have young people that, have challenges, and we also have teachers that have challenges and school staff that have challenges. And so we just don't want for a person to look at a situation and interpret it as an imminent physical threat and then use it as a justification for physically harming a child. And having a child removed from school and placed in detention. So we need to do we need to have a vision. We need to do a better job of thinking about what is it that we're trying to create and how do we get there, and not being very reactive and punitive in our approach to working with young people.
Well, I want to stay there a minute, because one of the things Open was good at, especially when I was engaged several years ago, was that coordinating meetings and open lines of communication between education facilitators and community and parents. You guys at several forums and summits and debates and little conferences about engaging parents with the leaders in education. It almost seems like many of these bills, there's no conversation with parents. There's no conversation with students. Is there any effort to propose what you guys have done here locally, statewide, to kind of because reactionary politics is really not going to get it done. And it really seems to me like many of our legislators and political leaders, they will operate in a silo without ever talking to a parent, without ever talking to a student, without ever talking to advocacy groups like yourself.
So your question is, are there statewide?
Are there efforts to try to at least begin to have more holistic conversations? Because some of these bills, they're not really, they are kind of scary. Yeah. But it would seem to me that if we would have a conversation about it, similar to what you guys did with equity and accountability, right? If we would bring leaders together, kind of listen to parents, listen to folk, then maybe we could get something more sane, more salient, and probably with a better chance to make a difference.
Right. I mean, there are those efforts. There are a lot of groups out there that, organize parents, that make sure that they get information to parents, that, offer to bring parents to OPSB meetings. But, how do I say this? Parents are doing the best that they can, and they're putting their trust in the people who occupy this space to do what's best for all children. What often happens in this work is when something goes down that people don't like, the first thing that we do is we point our finger at parents. And we say, if only you had been at this meeting, or only if you had known. And the fact of the matter is that it is not parents who are, responsible for a lot of these these policies that are coming out there that are harming kids. So that's the first part. The second part is that parents are working, parents are busy, parents are taking care of their families, they're being parents, and so when we invite parents out to these places, we need to make sure that we are inviting them to a space with their shared power. I mean, oftentimes when you go to these meetings, decisions have already been made.
Right.
and parents are just kind of there as ornaments. Oftentimes when parents are called into the room, it's not really to, get their opinion about what is it they think should happen, but it's really to try to see if they can confirm whatever decision that particular body wants to make. And so, there are a lot of groups out there that are trying to get information to parents, again, like ourselves, and many others are trying to make sure that information is digestible, that it is accessible. But another conversation that we really need to be having is like the people that are supposed to be representing the best interests of children, what is really their goal? What is motivating them in this work? And I think that's a larger issue. Like the Safe Schools Act, supposedly Safe Schools Act, and the Teacher Bill of Rights Act 301, 298, 303. This is not about parents not knowing what's happening. This is about someone having in their mind a particular concept of what a student is, them thinking that they understand what's happening in schools. They might have had some folks who have come to them with describing a particular issue or an incident. And again, they're also reacting to what's happening nationally, and they're coming up with all of this. And so we support parents, and we definitely want them to be informed, but I just don't want the conversation to be thinking that, the parents are the locus of the problem, because they're not.
We're talking to Nahliah, the executive director of the Orleans Public Education Network. That's a really good point, and thank you for that, because we have a tendency to want to blame the parents. My good friend, one of my sheroes, Dr. Rashida Govan, constantly reminds me and us that, there's several victims out there, including parents, that the parents and victims should be able to depend on the system to chart the right waters, to go in the right direction. But it's extremely easy, when we say, well, hold on a second, this should happen in the home first. So I think we have to be extremely mindful.
And we also be mindful about the difference in the power structure between parents and some of these, institutions that we're asking them to speak out against. There's definitely a power dynamic there that doesn't work in their favor all the time. Okay,
yeah, we're going to go to line one. Ms. Key, you're on with Nahliah Weber, Executive Director of the Orleans Public Education Network. Education Bills Legislative Watch right here on the Good Morning Show. Talk to me, Ms. Key.
All right. Well, good morning.
Good morning. God bless you.
I just wanted to say, as somebody in the trenches and also someone who is educated here in New Orleans but gone other places and have my own children, the one thing that I noticed in New Orleans that we do have a problem with, and I know you don't want to blame the parents, but it's an apathy. I'm sorry.
Apathy, you said?
When I was working with Orleans Parish and then working with Jefferson Parish, one thing I went to school board meetings just as an educator, parent, and what I found was that the school board meetings would be closed unless it was something that was like, okay, we're going to cut funding for the band. Then everybody shows up. But when they're actually talking about real legislation and passing all these bills, nobody's there. And my is that they're not interested in knowing or even thinking about what they're doing or what's going on. I came in for school board meetings and as a educator because I wanted to be going on with my child. And the one thing that, even as a personal teacher, you know, if you call home and your parents are like, well, you deal with it. They're at school with you. Yeah, you should have trust in what's going on at school, but you should also be involved. And I think it's ridiculous that you have to put most of the responsibility on the parent. The parent in the home is the first teacher. So if you're not there, and I'm sorry, as a teacher, they're paying $40,000 for somebody with a master's degree in 2 years. I can't do everything for your 160 caseload of kids. It's ridiculous to expect a school to do everything with 2 counselors and 1,000 kids.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Key. Thank you. I think Ms. Key shared the frustration of a lot of people. And she's a teacher. She's in the trenches. She's in the classroom. And as someone who volunteers and spends a lot of time in the school system, who has been guilty of saying, hey, where's the mom, where's the dad, where's the parent? the problem is, where's the mom, where's the dad, where's the parents? So
Absolutely, and I don't disagree with anything. Is it Miss Key? I don't disagree with anything that she said. Coming from, in my own experience, coming from working with in other states, other cities, and other school systems, I would say, though, that the level of apathy or participation is not really that different in New Orleans than it is anywhere else. I saw the same thing in New York City. I saw the same thing in Baltimore when I worked there. And so, yes, in every school system that I work in, that's always a question. Where are all the parents? And do parents care about all things rather than some of the entertainment things like sports and band and all that? I will say, though, that we're talking about a couple of different things. Every parent is not going to be 100% on top and involved. And that is, and I would also say that that is not required in order to change things.
Wow,
right?
That's a great point.
Right. So it's about getting the parents who are there, who are showing up, organizing them, working with them, sharing power with them to make things happen. It is frustrating. I was a teacher. It is frustrating when you're working with a young person who has needs, who has challenges in the classroom. You make calls home. You try to engage the parent in some kind of way, and then they don't show up. But then we also have to have a conversation about how we're engaging. I always try to call parents to me. But that's not sharing power.
Right.
When I'm saying this is where I am, come and meet me here.
Right.
You mentioned something about schools can't do everything. I think that schools can do a lot, but teachers can't do everything, and teachers need to be supported with supportive staff.
That's a whole system approach and conversation. We're going to go back to the lines. Line 2, Brother Rip, you're on with Miss Nahliah Weber, Executive Director of the Orleans Public Education Network.
Yeah, I would like to relate the whole essence of the school process into the need of society, because the educational system has always been basically educating the society to serve the need of society. Now, we are in a situation in New Orleans under an experimental program with this so-called charter school thing, where the rest of the state who have a vendetta against New Orleans and its African history and heritage that moves against the needs of the people of the city of New Orleans. And it's reflected in the bias, prejudice, and discrimination that is constantly coming out of Baton Rouge and from North Louisiana towards South Louisiana. And it is a myth for any teacher to ever say that a parent do not care about their child in school, because the parent is the one that get up and feed the child, get the child dressed, and get them into school. Mm-hmm. Therefore, society put a dual rule on the parent, that the parent have to work to maintain the household and also have to deal with the process of raising a child as well as getting a child into the school system. So I think when we start looking at this thing in reality, we can look at the underground core of what's happening in New Orleans that started with Leslie Jacobs, that went up there, that controlled the MFP, the amount of funding that come down there, and using the experimental process that we're going through in all these parishes and bringing in people from outside to analyze our existing problem that presently exists based upon the whole mindset that come out of Baton Rouge to put down New Orleans and its heritage. So therefore, when we start teaching our African heritage and start teaching the truth of our people, then we understand how the European is using the lack of knowledge to maintain the control of our people.
Thank you.
I'm out of here, sir.
Thank you. Brother Rip said a lot, but he said a lot that matters, especially about American history and what we're teaching and how it's used to impact who we are and how we think in this country.
Absolutely. And in our work in K through 12, what we're looking at is not just a culturally relevant, for example, that's, a culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally relevant teacher force, but we're looking for culturally conscious folk, right? And a critical pedagogy that teaches people about their actual history, the actual history of the United States, right? And also accurate history about who our children are and the greatness that they come from. So I would agree with the gentleman who was just on the line that in that regard, there is a lot of work to do in terms of who is in front of our young people, right, what they represent, and the tools and the information that they're putting in front of our young people so that they can understand themselves before they go out into this world. So I would definitely agree with the gentleman about that. I would also agree that understanding positionality is important. What the gentleman mentioned is that, there's some things that are just, a lot of this is things that are just native to Louisiana and New Orleans. They're very deep, the centuries deep, and it takes being from here to understand that. So I would definitely agree with that, and we do need to continue to elevate and promote the power of the local people in terms of determining what their education system is going to look like in the policies.
This is why I love my listening audience. They're definitely engaged around the topics that matter. Line 1, Brother Mims, you're on with Miss Weber.
Hey, Miss Weber, it's hard to follow Rip, but I met Rip 30 years ago at Laurel School on Jackson Avenue. They done changed the name now, like they changed Woodson. But, we need to see, he speaks truth to power, and he spoke his mind, and he volunteered, and I volunteered. We need to have more black men in volunteering in schools, and let me say this, we need to have the schools accepting black men. I'm not talking about the so-called best of the best, but the brothers who know what it is, what it's about, and can help them. See, our kids can't learn this until they see somebody. And I went to Woodson, and Rip, I tell you, they got schools they don't want to sell. They don't want. They really, they don't tell you that, but you go there and you offer your assistance, and you never hear from them. All right. So we need our children need to see us men doing great things, and we can do that. We will. Favor is better than money. Have a great day.
Thank you. It's obvious from our callers and the diverse topics from Ms. Key, talking about being in the trenches and what happens at home and how it works or doesn't work together, to Brother Rip talking about, cultural and accurate history, actually being taught, to how the systems work or don't work, from accountability to equity. There's a lot that needs to be done. I think it's safe to say that this minefield called public education, we're not really close to navigating our way fully through it yet.
No, we're not. And
no one knows what it's going to be like next year or the year after, just yet.
Right. This is going to be an ongoing thing. Essentially what we're talking about is the right and the ability of the community to determine how they want to educate their young. Right? And that's a personal battle. It's a cultural battle. It's a spiritual battle. It's not something that's going to be completely addressed in the legislature. Right? And so what we need is all of your callers, they all touched on a part of the vision, but the vision is, when we were talking about public education in New Orleans, we're talking about the education of black children, first of all, right? We're talking about a public school system that is over 90% black. We're also talking about a public school, a population where about 80% of the children are coming from low income or growing up in homes with, low income. And so we're talking about the intersection between race. We're talking the intersection between race and economics, and children, families, communities that find themselves in public schools. They need something in particular. That's not just about math and ELA, but also how they're going to build their community, how they're going to move forward in their community, social mobility, and all of those things. And so we need a vision for public schools that covers all of that.
We're going to take this last caller. Brother Ronald, you're on with Ms. Weber. Talk to me.
Thank you for taking my call, Oliver. She sounds like some stuff we had in Central City. We had leadership development. And it started with parenting. In the former Central City, December 1958, it started with the parents in the community, and it went down to the children. I was honored to be one at 12 years old, and it went back to the parenting issue. But it's September 15, 2005. I was in the Reverend Skip Alexander was protesting in the Metroplex with his home underwater that they had white men watching black women shower behind a piece of bed screen. Well, a news reporter and Willie Sanders, we went down to see what the record was. And they broke it up and they shut it down until they got some trailers. But Rev told us then, he said, man, they're going to take y'all in schools. Watch. We went down to the Department of Education. I went in the restroom, and I witnessed the plot. They plotted. I call all these names I've been calling for the last 15 years. They plotted. You know what the deal was? St. Helena Parish had just about the same grades that we had, even worse, but they didn't have an income at $500 million that comes from a property assessment, like the city of New Orleans. And it's been about money from then, and it's still about money now. I was honored to be at a meeting last night, and they're doing some strategies to deal with it. But it's the parent initiative. They have attacked the parenting of the children in the school. And so you say parents are lazy, this and that. How you give a meeting at 2 o'clock in the day and want the parents there? You know they work in the hospitality industry. And it was part of the attack the parents. When I hear folks say, oh, the parents don't care, they work. And they know they schedule meetings. They schedule meetings where you're not attending. And I'll close by saying, Oliver, if you think it's not a joke, I ask anybody, go walk into any school and let's ask them, can you come and see what's really going on? I guarantee you they won't allow you, and they will call the police for it, and they do it for parents all of the time. Thank you for taking my call. We got to keep our eyes on, but let's get our parents back trained. Oliver, you know, your mama didn't play that.
Oh, not at all.
Dr. May Taylor, she came out of McDonald 36 because we had 1,700 kids in the 283 population school. We had 4 platoons, and the revolution started, and it haven't stopped. So we got to keep it going with our parents. And thank you again. Keep up the great work, and I'll see you tomorrow at Chia. No matter if it's snowing or thunderstorm, I'm getting my boat.
We'll see you
over at the lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Miss Weber, excuse me, not disrespectful. I think what you've tried to say is a lot more complicated than just. In an ideal situation, we want engaged, responsible parents. And in an ideal situation, we want an education system, where the solution isn't arming teachers or allowing teachers to be aggressive towards kids. But we don't have an ideal situation. But what we can do is what you provide is an opportunity to track this legislation and get involved in
changing legislation.
Ultimately, what the community needs the public education system to be like.
These bills that we do support, that we see moving the needle, they're being pushed by regular, everyday people who have stepped up to the plate as advocates. Again, we're talking about FLIC, we're talking about Power Coalition, we're talking about the Grade Level Reading Campaign, we're talking about the Youth in Discipline. I mean, these are regular, everyday citizens who have gotten together and saying these kinds of things are not okay. We have a vision. These are the kinds of bills, these are the kinds of policies that are going to do right by our kids. And so it doesn't take a Superman or a Superwoman.
No, it doesn't.
It takes concerned citizens working with other folks to craft legislation that actually has a proactive vision for our
change doesn't
young
happen
people.
unless you're willing to do that. First of all, thank you for what you do at Open in your effort not only to bring parents in the system together and open the lines of communication, but to at least give us some clarity about accountability and what these bills mean. How can people get in touch with you, and how can people join this fight to make sure that we have a better product called education with more accountability and equity?
Absolutely. We are definitely around on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can reach out to us on our website, www.opennola.org. We're going to have a policy breakfast, our annual policy breakfast. You were very nice to
one of the facilitators,
yes, to facilitate last year. It'll be Friday, May 18th at the Jones Walker Law Firm. We're going to be talking about a couple of things all around accountability. Also, a little bit further down the line, we're having our second annual Parents Night Out event. It's a week of events where we're giving parents tools and information on how to navigate the education system.
Nahliah Weber, Executive Director of the Orleans Public Education Network. You promise to come back to the Good Morning Show?
Sure. Love to.
Thanks
for having
me. You're a blessing. We appreciate what you do. Anytime we can help, we're there. This is OT and Early Bird. When we come back, we're going to talk to Pastor D. Women of Excellence Conference, right? Coming to New Orleans. Back again. We'll be back after the break.